Hello and welcome to what a lot of people have been talking about recently. So this is a video that has been suggested by BrainDivers2581, but like I said, a lot of people have already been discussing that Season 6 or Season 7, don't do the meme, are going to be a second chance season. Now, I could see Season 7 being a second chance season because I think that if we have the fans from next season, some of them are going to be early boots, and then or from Season 5, I mean. And then we have some of the Season 6 characters, as long as that's an all-new cast. Then I think we can have a second chance after that. But, or we can have it right after Season 5. We'll see. But I think that we have a little too little of characters right now, to the point where I've had to put an all-star in a second chance season. But I think it's still alright. So, in this timeline, we're going to just ignore the fact that fans versus favorites happened, but I'm still not adding Rosa. In fact, I didn't add any of the favorites, but I do think there is a case for Rosa being here. I decided to add Tess over Rosa. I was debating over the two, but I did add everyone else that Brain Beaver suggested: Will, Drew, Nick, Lil, Dan, Oliver. Or well, actually, I didn't do Oliver because he's he's a staff member. Or at least he was. Carol, Kai, Maggie, Alicio, Ted, Diego, Tristan, Alinda, and Ivy. So, yeah, let's go over our teams. Since there's only 16 people here, I only opted for 2 teams of 8. On the orange team, we have Ted, Kai, Maggie, Zaid, Drew, Carol, Will, and Lil. And on the green team, we have Tristan, Richard, Linda, Ivy, Nick, Dan, Tess, and Alicio. Now, one thing you will notice is that there is, it's like 50% Season 1 and 2 characters, 50% Season 4 characters. That's mainly because a lot of Season 1 characters and 2 characters had their time to shine in All-Stars, as Season 4 characters obviously only have Season 4. So pretty much every pre-merger and some of the mergers of Season 4 that didn't make it that far, namely Richard and Zaid. Well, Zaid is a bit different. I'll talk about Zaid here in a second. Have made it. In fact, yeah, Zaid made 6th place, but at the same time, dude, Zaid did nothing, and he really did nothing gameplay-wise, storyline-wise, so I decided to bring him back here. But let's get into it. So I believe episode 1 would just be an intro episode, and we wouldn't really have to talk too much about that, and we'd get to episode 2. Now, I'm not going to go in-depth with all the challenges and stuff, mainly because I have a lot of other videos I need to make today, but I am going to say that I believe this episode, who do I think would be the team? Because I need to think of who I would want to be the first boot, which would be kind of unfortunate for them because their first boot, or they'd be the first boot on the second chance, so they would barely even get a second chance. But I do believe that I'm going to go ahead and give it the loss to Orange Team. So, Orange Team loses, and let's talk about the dynamics here. I think the first thing that happens is we get kind of an Elders Alliance with, Ted is not, old, but he's older than these guys, that's for sure. So he's able to rope in Carol. I think they bond quite a bit. And Lil, not really knowing much about Ted, I doubt she keeps up with the show, would, also join this, and this would recruit Will as well. Now, I think this is where Ted would say that he's decided to study the game and play the game as if he's playing a game of Survivor, or, well, he'd say Disventure Camp, instead of playing a game of poker, because that did not work out for him well last time. So I think that he would do the first thing that would make Lil question her alliance, because I feel like Lil is a Heart of Gold kind of character. Same with Will. But I think they'd still stick with them. And what he'd do is he would think about trying to drive a wedge between Kai and Maggie, but they're all over each other. I could see them even being in a Jeff Bridget kind of deal, where to the point where I think that Ted be able to rope in Drew and also convince Zaid which I think Lil and Will would be not so happy about, because this would obviously split one of them up, and the other one would be really sad, but they're just doing it. And yeah, I think that semi-unanimously, it's like maybe 2 votes Carol for being super rude, and then last season, and then 6 votes. I'm actually gonna give this to Kai. Then again, Kai got out so early last time. Maggie does too, but yeah, sorry, Kai. He won one of my other what ifs, which I'm not gonna spoil which one, because that one was a really good what if. Y'all should totally watch it. But so I don't think he really needs to make it that far this time either. I try to diverse my videos. So then we get to episode 3, and I think it'd be good for the green team to lose instead of them just losing twice. Also in episode 3, 2 idols are hidden at camp, but nobody's found them yet. Well, for green team, I think that here's how the dynamics are going. Tristan and Richard have their fun little rivalry, but what we have here is we have Ivy and Tristan, who I think that this relationship has gotten to the point where Tristan is starting to call Ivy mom. Now, if I think that would work. There's still like a friendship relationship, but I think she's at least a little motherly. So it's kind of like a mom, dad, and then the child. And I think that this would start to bug Linda a little bit, who's aligned with Richard. And since they have the rivalry, but not like to vote each other out, just to like do better in challenges than each other. But Linda not much has changed with her kids at home, so seeing this mother-kid relationship would make her a little annoyed. So I think that she'd try to grasp onto one of the other kids here, and I think that would be Dan. And I think Dan would be okay with that, just because Dan wouldn't really know what else to do. He'd try to get in good with the painters over here, which are these two, and he'd try to get in good with Nick, but I don't think either would work. Which, by the way, yeah, Tess and Alicio are both pretty good friends here. Regardless, I think honestly, actually, you know what? I have a good idea. I think that Linda would get kind of like a devil on her shoulder from Dan, and because Dan would want to not have these 4 get in really close, and then screw him over if they keep losing. So he's going to take advantage of this crack before it gets patched up. So maybe he would be able to get in the painters, because I feel like he'd be into some pretty nerdy stuff that they'd be into. Or at least, I think also both of these people's arcs have shown them growing more into more social people. So I think that, yeah, Dan would be able to convince Linda to have the 4 of them vote out Ivy for not only annoying Linda, but also being a threat to the alliance, or her alliance with Richard. Which Linda would be pretty just anxious right now and willing to do that, but I think she'd regret it pretty quickly after, especially because Ivy, Tristan, and mainly Richard would be really pissed at her. So Ivy is eliminated. You could say she goes for Tristan, but I think it just makes more sense for her to go to Ivy. Also, I think Ivy is another character who's just kind of completed her arc. And as for these 2, actually these 3, because Ivy, I think maybe they'd vote for one of the painters since they have an alliance. And as for Nick, I think Nick would hear about that and also vote one of the painters, but not the same one. So like these 3 would vote for Tess, while he'd vote for Alicio. Regardless, I think that the green team would actually lose again in episode 4, and this is where I think one of the idols is found in episode 4, but it wasn't the green team's idol. So I think Dan has kind of become the head of this group. These painters have been kind of just vibing together. They've gotten along great. Obviously, it's not a ship. Alicio is already with Natalia. But I think that they would both just be pretty fine with just following whatever Dan says, as they appreciate the art of wherever they're at. I guess we can put them on the same island that they'll use for Season 5, because that place is beautiful. So Linda is she's kind of dug her own grave because Tristan and Richard have paused their rivalry to just be pissed off at Linda. So I think that they would try to rope in Nick, Tristan and Richard would, but I don't think it would really matter. Instead, I think these four would honestly, who do I think they would go for? I think that Linda would feel bad and not want to go for Richard, and she would use the excuse with these three that he's easily the best physical competitor left there, and they need physical players. And I think Dan, Tess, and Alicia would agree with that. Instead, I think she would go... Well, I guess Dan's the one deciding, so I guess Tristan for being super likable, because Dan is a very strategically minded player. And honestly, this kind of sucks, but I think Tristan does get out here. But guys, remember, there is a comeback episode, so we shall see if Tristan comes back. Because I feel like the community, if this actually happened, the community would freaking lose it. But that's what comebacks are for. So then we get to the orange team. And I think that this would actually be where our idol play happens. So Ted has been the kind of big, not big bad, but big like ringleader here. And I think that over this time, him and Carol have grown like the main alliance, and I think they've kind of really indoctrinated Drew into their alliance, who is an adult by this point, but is still shy and timid and just glad to have two adults who treat him like an adult because of his disability of being mute. He's kind of just not taken seriously. And as for Zayd is playing with his head instead of his heart this time, now that Ivy and Tristan have been eliminated back-to-back. And after what happened last season, he's back to being his incredibly salty self. So I think that I think Lil and Will would actually switch up, though, because the amount of hate from these two, as well as Zayd especially, would cause them both to want to flip. And I think that they would actually, I think Will would find the idol. Actually, I think Lil would find the idol. I think that makes sense for her to find the idol. So Lil would find the idol and hand it to Maggie as a peace offering. And Maggie would obviously play it on herself because as far as these four were concerned, it was literally about to be a 6-1 vote. And she plays it on herself, and I think she would take out Carol here. Because I think these two would say that they'll do whatever she wants to do, which, even though the better gameplay moves to get Ted out, she just really doesn't like how mean Carol is. So Carol is eliminated in episode 5. Then we get to episode 6, and I think that this is going to be the point where the other idol is found on the green team. And I think the orange team loses again. And when the orange team loses, it's a full-on 3 versus 3. So I think it would come down to 3 votes Ted, just because they want him gone because he's been the ringleader. While these 3 votes would have to choose between 2 Hulks, 2 gentle giants, and Lil, who's she's really old, but she's still got it, kind of like a Richard situation. So I think they'd overall go for Will because Will doesn't really have that much confidence outside of Ashley, and Ashley obviously isn't here. And I think Ted would think that he can take on Will. And honestly, I think he does. I think Will does get eliminated in... Oh, wait, I'm so sorry. I just realized I forgot to say episode 6 is a musical episode. So we'd have these 3 play a song, these 3 play a song, and then these 2 would probably do some sort of song, and then these 2 would do kind of like a kind of hateful song of mainly Linda and Richard doing jabs at each other mid-song. And these 2 would have like some boring art piece song. Anyways, episode 7 is when all this takes place, so we can say episode 5 is still when the idol's played and the green team finds their idol. So yeah, I think that between Ted and Will, I think that Will would get eliminated here. I think in most scenarios, Ted tanks Will. And I just don't think there's much that could happen to save him. So we have 3 eliminations before the merge, and I think this is about time for the green team to lose. And when the green team loses, we have got Nick and Richard versus the Painters and Nick and Linda. And honestly, I think the guilt would start to get to Linda at this point, because Linda and Richard have still bonded, met up in person, and bonded a lot during this time. And I think that what would happen here is Linda would see, because she tried to rope onto Dan because of what happened between Ivy and Tristan, but she would see that Dan is starting to be the boss of her, and she would do what she honestly needs to do with her kids, and she would smack Dan. Now Dan is an adult by this point. I think he'd probably be like 18 by this point, or 19, but he's still pretty much a kid compared to her. She'd still call her kid, or still call him kid. But now that he's been bossing around, she would smack him and tell him off after he's being rude and taunting Richard, obviously causing Richard to and her to make up. And I think the 3 of them, which Nick has kind of just fallen into being aligned with Richard now, the 3 of them would vote Dan, but I think the 3 of them would vote traitor Linda. And honestly, I think this is going to be the second time a villain beats the odds and takes out their hero. So Linda is eliminated in episode 8. So then we arrive at episode 9, and when in episode 9, I think that the green team loses again, and after that, I think Dan would enact a pretty risky move. It's not his riskiest move. You'll see his riskiest move here in a minute, and that is roping in Nick. And while he could just get Richard out, since he's done the calculations and knows the merge should be really soon, so he doesn't want Richard to start winning merge challenges, he also realizes that the Painters are going to become more of a threat once they start aligning with people on the other team, and if they ever get sick of Dan, and there's not really a crack that he can form between them. So Nick, who's only just been aligned with Richard due to circumstance, is able to bond more with Dan, and I think that the 2 of them would enact a plan to manipulate these 2 into voting for Richard, and which would just be Dan telling him to vote for Richard, pretty much. And then these 2 actually vote for Alicio. Now they're causing this tiebreaker, and also, by the way, Richard would vote for Dan. But they're causing this tiebreaker, so that either way, big person can get out here. And they're doing this tiebreaker instead of just for suring Alicio, because they know that they can't get Richard on their side. Richard and Dan are not going to align at all. So this happens, and the tiebreaker between Alicio and Richard, I'm actually gonna say it blows up in Dan's face, and Richard is eliminated. Now, that's still not the worst thing in the world. That's still a pretty good thing. But now, it's starting to look like it's going to be a forced tiebreaker if they lose again before the merge. And that actually happens. They do lose again before the merge, and we get another loss. Now, it looks like we're going to have 2 people, or 2 votes Dan, and then we're going to have 2 votes Alicio, because Dan believes that he can take Alicio before he can take Tess. And that's what happens, but there's no tiebreaker, which honestly Emily, who's hosting this, is thankful for, because there's already been enough tiebreakers this season. Instead of a tiebreaker, Dan pulls out the idol, which he found searching for earlier, and he plays it, and it turns out, instead of voting Alicio, him and Nick actually voted Tess. So Tess is eliminated in episode 10. So then we get to the merge, and we're going to have our comeback episode. But first, our merge consists of Ted, Drew, Zayd, Lil, Maggie, Dan, Nick, and Alicio. So now let me quickly bring up Tess, Richard, Linda, Will, Carol, Tristan, Ivy, and Kai. So, I think... Who do I think is helping who? I think that Ivy wouldn't want... Well, I'll just go in order. I think Alicia's helping you. I think... Who's helping Richard? Who's helping Richard? I think that Dan would go with Richard to make sure Richard doesn't get in. I think Ted would go with Linda to try to align with Linda in the merge. I think for Will, we'd get Lil. I think for Carol, she, I guess, would just get stuck with Nick. Ivy would tell Zayd to help Tristan get in because Ivy doesn't really want to go back in, but Tristan does. And Maggie would go with Kai, which kind of just leaves Ivy with Drew. And I think that nothing really interesting would happen between them. Instead, I think... Who do I think I want to win the comeback? I think for plot reasons and also so that people wouldn't actually freaking riot, Tristan would just have to be the one. To be honest, even though I like Tristan way more than I like Tess, I honestly kind of feel like Tess does deserve to make merge this time around. Just because I feel like Tess needs more. Out of the old Vibe Tribe, which is what I call the friendship between Hunter, Ali, and I'll just call them the Golden Trio, like they have the one in Total Drama. Out of the Golden Trio from Season 2, she definitely has the least, especially in All-Stars. So I guess it's fine, though, because I don't really want to bring her back and then her just have the same dynamic with Alicia for longer. So, yeah, Tristan's brought back, and we move on to episode 12. So, let's talk about our new dynamics. I think Dan and Ted both agree to an alliance and to rope their resources together, but both say that they plan on betraying each other as soon as possible. This allows them to rope in a Nick, they rope in a Drew, but they actually thought they'd have access to a Zayd here, but they actually don't, because now that Tristan's back in, Zayd's kind of in a Hannah Amelie situation, where Tristan has come in and wants to just have a fun time with Tristan's bro, but Zayd is cold-hearted and by the game and just not really in a fun mood. So I think Tristan would try to help Zayd with that, and both of them would be a little less aligned with these jerks over here. Andrew, he's not a jerk. He's just using them to get farther in the game. He's fine with being a pawn. Meanwhile, I think Lil and Maggie would bond pretty well, and I think Alicia would kind of be the outcast here. But I think that overall, they would probably... I think Zayd would tell Tristan that to get them both farther in the game and to also make sure Tristan and Zayd don't get out anymore, they should still pretend that they're going to stay with Ted, Dan, Nick, and Drew, at least for one elimination. And even though Tristan really doesn't want to, they do. And I think they'd eliminate Maggie for being a huge physical threat. So, sorry, Maggie. She would definitely have an arc of being proud of herself. Basically an extended arc of her Season 2 arc. Which, by the way, has been fire. The Season 2 remake has done wonders for her character. But anyways, I think that now that we've come to this 4v4, I think Tristan would try to make a breakthrough to Drew. And I think it would work. I think Drew would kind of start to get annoyed with how Nick, who's become more of a strategic player himself, Dan and Ted don't really let him speak, which is ironic because he's literally mute, but you know what I mean. They don't respect his input. Well, Tristan wants to, and Tristan is like, hey, if we get in good with Lil and Alicia, who are a lot nicer, then maybe we can turn the tides on this game, and you can make your own game moves. And I think Drew would be pretty hyped with that. Now, the only problem here is flipping Zayd. And I think this would actually have a pretty emotional moment happen between Zayd and Tristan, where Zayd would talk about how he's there was kind of a Zayd curse, similar to the Hannah curse in this, where he would be really sad about the fact that he feels like in real life outside of the game, while Tristan and Ivy have got to do so much together, he's been still trying to provide for his mom and not living with them, at least not yet. There are plans for them to move in together, but Ivy and Zayd haven't got married yet, and he hasn't moved over there just yet. So he was hoping that this game would allow him to hang out with both of them, but then they both got eliminated really early, and then Tristan's back, and now he feels like he has to keep Tristan in the game. He doesn't care about anyone else but Tristan, and he feels like these villains are the way to do it. And I think that Tristan would really respect that from him, but I think Tristan would also be able to convince him that Tristan's able to make just his own game moves and own decisions a little bit, which would play into Tristan's arc of the parents and all that. And I think that they would bond quite a bit, and they would obviously be able to get a desperate Lil and Alicia on their side, and they'd be able to turn the tides. Now, I have to make a decision here. Who do I want to get out? Well, I think that it's actually going to come down to who wins immunity here. Because I feel like they'd either go for Ted or Dan, but for simplicity's sake, I'm gonna say Dan wins the immunity. I feel like Ted has kind of outlived his usefulness. I feel like he works best as a secondary villain, and I think Dan will become more so the villain of the season. So Ted is eliminated and Dan won the immunity. We can even have a thing with even though they were, or at least they presumed they were on top, Dan and Ted were the final two that were gonna win the challenge, and I think Dan would go really aggressive on Ted to win the immunity, so that just in case, because Dan, after getting voted out so early last time, everyone's had their moment where they say, after I got eliminated last season, because it's his second chance, where they all have learned from their mistakes, his big learning from his mistake has been trusting nice people. So and just trusting people in general. So he's trying to look out for himself, keep all his options open, and you'll see more of that here in a minute, that's for sure. Okay, guys, I've decided to retcon something. I realized after I was called down to eat dinner, I realized that only one Season 2 person made merge, and it was Maggie. And since I already wanted Tess to be someone who got more of a spotlight this time around, I decided to say that Alicia was the one voted out instead of Tess. The only thing that changes is that during the comeback episode, instead of Alicia trying to help Tess get back in, Tess is trying to help Alicia get back in. I think that's fair because we need Season 2 representation here. Because, I mean, there's, 1, 2, 3, 4 Season 1 people and 2 Season 4 people. There was 3 Season 4 people. So, yeah, I feel like I just needed to do that. But regardless, I think Dan wins the immunity in episode 14. And I think that there's not really anything Nick can do. I think that these 5, which she's just kind of taken the role of Alicia in these past 2 episodes, these 5 would just go ahead and take out Nick. And I think when we get to episode 15, things do ramp up a little more in terms of being interesting. And how they ramp up is, I think Tess is kind of in a similar situation to Ellie right now financially, which means she's doing terrible. Now, obviously, I know by Tom Jake Season 2, Ellie's doing a lot better now that she has her art business, or clothing design business. But, pre-Ellie, or pre-that for Ellie is kind of how Tess is doing financially. They were in the same classes, after all. And I think Tess is starting to feel a little bit like Ellie in the sense that she's really is going to be sacrificing some stuff to win that money. So whenever I should say before that, Drew is approached by Dan, and Dan tries to work Drew back on his side. Now you will say, well, Drew just joined Tristan and Zayd after that whole big moment. With Tristan's main thing that was able to convince Drew being that Drew would get his very own big moment, his big game move, yeah, I should say big game move that would be his game move, and Drew would really like the sound of that because honestly, Drew would really feel the effects of being completely forgotten about by everyone in the fandom, including myself, during his season 1 playthrough, or not really playthrough, but attempt, and holy stutter, and after he flips, he says he'll only flip if they can at least get, or if Jan can at least get one other person to flip. And I think that would be Tess, because Tess would realize that she doesn't have a relationship at all with any of the 4 other people. Well, they all have pretty established relationships at this point, with Lil liking Tristan, and obviously Tristan and Jade like each other. Not like, but you know what I mean. So she would just kind of get cooked if she didn't flip. So I think that the 3 of them, who do I think the 3 of them would target? I think they would have to target, they'd have to target the weakest person here. And unfortunately, guys, y'all knew Tristan wasn't going to win after Tristan came back, because I'm never going to let a comeback win. Actually, who knows? Maybe I will someday, but I feel like in 99% of scenarios that doesn't really work story-wise. So that being said, these 3 would vote Tristan because Tristan's way less of a threat than Zayd and Lil. And these 3 would vote Dan because Dan didn't win immunity here. So we can say like Zayd or Lil did. So I think in this tiebreaker, Dan, who this would be like one of his big villainous moves, this would really cement him as like the villain over Ted, and I guess kind of Nick, but not really. He would win and he would get Tristan out. So Tristan would wish good luck to Lil, but especially Zayd. However, guys, I don't think it would matter. There's not going to be any more like idols or flips throughout the season. In fact, I think that there's nothing these 2 can do. So I think after Tess is able, because Tess is still a nicer person, so Tess is able to convince Dan to calm down a little bit, and that they have a final 2 locked, and to let Drew get the win so that Drew doesn't feel like he needs to have another big game move with flipping back and forth. And Dan would be like, you know what, okay, that's fine. And Drew wins this immunity, and these 2, I think that this would be time for Lil to go. Lil's a bigger threat than Zayd game-wise. So then I realized that I don't have enough episodes on here. So let me just add episode 19, right? Because if I do boom, boom, and then we have our final 2. So there'd be 19 episodes in total, which is kind of an awkward number, but whatever. Anyways, I think Zayd would win the immunity with, now he's had his Zayd curse happen twice. Because Zayd has chilled out, mellowed out, been alright, ever since Tristan came back. Then Tristan and Lil got out in the same way Ivy and Tristan did. I think Zayd is pissed. Zayd, by this point, hates this game more than anybody who's played it ever has, including Hannah. I think Zayd absolutely despises this game by this point. But I think that he would use all that anger as a strength to win the immunity here. And I think this would be where he'd be able to convince big game move Drew, or he'd try to convince big game move Drew to get out Dan as a big game move, because now he's getting out the main villain. But I think Tess, who wants to stay with the final 2 lock of Dan and her, because she really thinks her chances against Dan are pretty high, and she knows Dan more than she knows Drew, just by she can actually interact with him outside of like sign language, which she probably knows, but you know, that's not nearly as personal. I think that it would be another tiebreaker. I feel like my videos always have way too many tiebreakers, but I think it's alright. And once again, for the 3rd, maybe even 4th tiebreaker in a row, Drew loses, that's Tess, Drew loses, and Dan wins another tiebreaker. I think that this is fair this season, because Dan has won like 3 or 4 tiebreakers throughout this season. So, yeah, I think that this would just be hype to watch. And we get to our final 3. And, guys, I almost want Zayd to get farther, but at the same time, I don't. So I could see here's what I see happening. I see, well, I don't know. I also kind of, it feels a little cheap to retcon Tess back in halfway through the video and then have her be a finalist. Fuck it. Sorry, Zayd gets eliminated here. Fuck this game. Fuck everybody except the Vibe Tribe and like Lil and a few others. And he says, fuck you, Emily. Fuck you, cameraman. Fuck everybody. And he storms off, and it's a really big moment. And Tess just kind of shrugs while Dan laughs, kind of maniacally, because he's become the main villain of the season, and he knows he's a villain, and he loves he's a villain. And then we get to the finale. Now, on the one hand, we have Tess, who really needs the money, and also has gone through not the biggest arc in the season ever, but she's built some relationships with, like, Alicio, for example, and she's made some game moves here and there. But on the other, we have Dan, who I think this villain version of Dan would be amazing. And I honestly want Dan to, if not be a villain, kind of be like an Isabel or an Anastasia, where he's a villainous strategist, not like Jade, where he's just a strategist and has no personality, even though I like Jade. I would like that for him if he comes back in an actual second chance season, which I do see happening. I feel like he's an automatic lock-in if that ever happens. But I think that overall, guys, I gotta give it to Dan. Look, I get it. This would be the second time a villain's won a season, and I know people did not take the last win well, but I think they would take this one well. I think people would like this a lot. I know Dan already has a lot of fans. To be honest, Dan is a character I don't really care about, like, at all, but I know he has a lot of fans on the internet for some reason, and I think they would really love this. Now, I think the fans need to love the winners from now on after what happened with Idiot and Rhea. I liked Rhea. A lot of people don't like Rhea, and Idiot, the season 4, ugh, that was gross. I can't believe he won. But anyways, I think they need to like the winner. And I think this is how you write a villain winner. Because even though I love Rhea's villain win, I don't feel that it was handled the best still. Now, all that to say, I really enjoyed making this suggestion, and I really want to give a big shout out to BrainDevers2581. But I know a lot of y'all want to see your own names in videos, and while challenge suggestions will still be closed for a little bit longer, I do want to say that on Tuesday, I will be reading y'all's hot takes. So if y'all go to my community tab or posts tab, I don't remember exactly what it's called. I think it says posts on my channel. You will see one that has a traumatized looking Tristan as the picture. It says Disventure Camp hot. I want your Disventure Camp hot takes on it, and then it explains the rules at the bottom. If you comment there your biggest Disventure Camp related hot takes, you will probably be featured. I'll probably get through every single one. I'll try to be in my video where I will be reacting to your hot takes, as well as just adding some of my own in there, like how All Stars is the best season of Disventure Camp. And I'll probably explain a little bit more why Jake sucks. Actually, that's probably not really a hot take, so I'll probably save that for its own video. I could say how I like Rhea. I can say how... What else can I say? I can say Miriam shouldn't have won Season 1. She's boring. I can say Tom Jake sucks, that show. And a lot more. So, yeah, if that sounds exciting, or if you just want to tell me that Jake's your favorite character and that you have a mental illness because of that, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. Don't kill me. Then go do that. But, yeah, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Thanks again to BrainDever2581, and I cannot wait to catch y'all in the next one. See ya!